morning. Welcome to our broadcast of GPP3O, the Leadership and Peer Support class. My name is Kobe Flatt, and we are jumping into week 3 of our Term 2A material. I hope everybody had a glorious long weekend, enjoyed the family time. I apologize for being away yesterday. We are going to make up for that class, but we'll jump right in now to Lesson 7, carrying over where we left off last week. We are going to be looking at finishing our Lesson 6 material, if you remember from last Thursday, where I wanted to show some examples of how to practice and hone our research skills. Then we're going to move over and jump into Lesson 7 material today. Today's Lesson 7 material is going to be covering the topic of everyone's rights. Do you know your rights and those of others? With those rights are responsibilities. So what are your responsibilities? We will know that we're on the right track when our learning goals say that we can describe our rights and responsibilities, that we can differentiate between the different types of discrimination, and that we can explain the benefits and challenges of diversity. Our success criteria is that we will be able to, at the end of today's lesson, say, I can speak up for myself and others and know where to get information. Now, that having been said, and because of the day that I had yesterday and the morning I've had today, I want to really emphasize on how important this is. A lot of times we can think it's common sense. A lot of times we can think that this is dry and boring. But let me tell you, when things aren't going right, you need to be able to advocate for yourself, because I guarantee you nobody else is lining up to do it for you. I'm going to get on my soapbox a little bit, and I'll notice when I get cut off when I don't hear myself anymore. So I'm watching. I'm watching to make sure that I'm still okay. But it is so important to know what you have the rights for, what you have the rights to, and what you have the ability to fight for when you feel like you are not being heard, when you feel like you've exhausted all ends and you've gone through the proper channels and it's still not working. That does not mean give up. It means get help and continue to advocate for yourself or those who can't stand up for themselves. We are going through leadership and peer support. That is the whole class. You might feel like you are okay, and you might be. But we are going to learn to stand up for those who can't stand up for themselves. For the little ones who don't know their rights, for the new individuals who are unsure of what they have access to. That's where we are really going to shine as leaders and peer supporters. It's going to start with discrimination. On page 10 of Lesson 7, we learn that under the Ontario Human Rights Code, you have the right to be free from discrimination. In Canada, discrimination refers to unfair or prejudicial treatment of individuals or groups based on specific personal characteristics. Now, this can be race, gender, religion, age, ability, sexual orientation, or other protected grounds. It can occur in various settings. It doesn't just have to be in the workplace. It could be at school, in public places, housing, and access to services. It's important to know that no matter where you are, you have rights. And it's important to note, and we're going to get through it today, that yes, it's 2025, and everybody should know this. But just because you are in a school, for instance, doesn't mean that they are following what they are supposed to. Doesn't mean that they are doing the best they can. And you need to be able to stand up for yourself and say, this isn't good enough. I have this right. Let's make it right. We're going to talk about different types of discrimination. We're going to talk about the different protections that are in place here in Canada. Then we're going to talk about how it's important to know your rights and responsibilities, to be able to identify what is discrimination and how do we stop it. We're going to learn how this applies to us in various settings, but from the lens of leadership and peer support. The first thing that we look at are the types of discrimination. There are four main types. The first includes direct discrimination. The second is indirect discrimination. Then there is a failure to accommodate. This one is huge. The next one is harassment. We're going to break it up and go through each one so that you are aware of the signs and can help mitigate and stand up for to ensure that everyone's rights are being protected. The first is direct discrimination. This is when someone is treated unfairly because of their personal characteristics. This might be refusing to hire someone due to their ethnicity. We need to be mindful of unfair treatment. We have to know the difference between when are you not being hired because of a personal characteristic or when are you not being hired because you weren't the best candidate. Sometimes our pride gets in the way, so we really want to know the difference so that we are aware and can advocate appropriately. Secondly is indirect discrimination. These are policies or practices that appear neutral but disproportionately disadvantage certain groups. This could include workplace policies that don't accommodate religious practices. It doesn't seem like something so bad. It's not a direct attack against. It seems neutral, but there is a certain group being at a disadvantage, and we want to be mindful of that. We want to take everyone into consideration when policies and practices are made so that we can account for inclusivity and make sure that everybody is taken care of and their rights are being addressed. Next, we talk about failure to accommodate. So I say this one is big because it's often an easy one to hide behind in the sense that it's, oh yes, we know, we're aware, we just don't have the resources right now, or we just don't have the, and that drives me crazy, team. I hate that that is an excuse that so many places have hid behind. Failure to accommodate is not making reasonable accommodations for someone's needs related to a protected ground. Just because it's not easy or convenient for you doesn't mean you do not have to accommodate. Just because you might have to work a little bit harder or spend a little bit more money, you have to. These are the rules. Everyone is entitled to these rights, and you need to make accommodations despite it inconveniencing you or maybe costing a little bit more. An example of this is failing to provide wheelchair access. Yes, it might mean needing to expand on your property to create a ramp. It might mean needing to fork over a little bit more money to put in that wheelchair accessible button. It might mean needing to redo your front so that you have automatic doors. And it then means you have to upkeep it. You can't just say, yeah, we have a ramp there. No, we didn't shovel it because nobody ever uses it. That's not the point. It has to be there. You have to accommodate. Oh, we spent thousands of dollars on installing that door, but the button stopped working and it costs a lot to replace, and we've got to have a service tech come from out of town. Doesn't matter. Stop hiding behind the excuse and make sure that you are accommodating everyone's needs. Next, we look at harassment. This is unwanted comments, actions, or behaviors that demean or humiliate someone based on protected characteristics. This could include racist jokes, sexual harassment. It's when it is repeated, unwanted, either comments, actions, or behaviors. Discrimination can have significant personal or societal consequences. This includes emotional and mental health impact. We were just talking, it's 2025. We are now well aware of how real mental health is. That mental health is just as important, if not more important, than physical health. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean it is not there. We need to be mindful that discriminating against an individual can have huge emotional and mental health repercussions. These might appear as feelings of humiliation, stress, depression, or anxiety. It is hard to see anxiety. It is hard to see depression. It is hard to see stress. Yes, there are some warning signs. Yes, there are some times when often they get played down or they get swept aside because it's not convenient. But we need to recognize as leaders the impact that certain behaviors and comments can have and learn how to recognize them. Next, we take a look at economic impact. This is limited access to jobs, promotions, or fair play. We talk about social exclusion, the feeling of being alienated or marginalized in communities or workplaces. When you discriminate, you isolate. You have to be mindful of what that looks like so that you can combat against it. Loss of opportunities. These are barriers to education, housing, or services. Everybody has the right to an education, to housing, to services. You cannot deprive an individual of these opportunities. You have to be mindful what discrimination does to an individual so you can recognize it and fight against it. Just like the emotional mental health, there can be physical health issues. These are stress-related health conditions or physical harm due to harassment or violence. We talked about it's hard to see mental health. That yes, there can be warning signs and there can be some indicators. Often we don't recognize them as indicators until it's too late. And when it's gotten to that point, we have failed. We have not done our job in protecting the rights of these individuals. Usually, when it becomes a physical ailment that is now visually so in our faces, we've already passed the point of helping with the emotional and mental health impacts. Now it has manifested as a physical ailment that is often masked by other things and hard to treat because of its late stages. We need to recognize that discrimination can have significant impacts. Because we recognize now how real and how much damage discrimination can do, how when we ignore an individual's rights, there can be huge repercussions. Canada has put in place legal frameworks to protect individuals. These are specific laws and acts that have been created. They include the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the Canadian Human Rights Act, the Ontario Human Rights Code, Workplace Protections, Criminal Code of Canada, and Human Rights Tribunals. We're going to break them down and talk about each one so you know how they work for you to help you. The first is the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms was formed in 1982, is a key part of Canada's Constitution that protects fundamental rights and freedoms for individuals. It includes fundamental freedoms, so this would be freedom of expression, freedom of religion, assembly, and association. It includes democratic rights, the right to vote and run for office. Along that note, little sidebar, we are coming up to provincial elections. I'm going to use this as a little segue that you have the right to vote and run for office. But here's a sneak peek. You also have the responsibility to become informed and educated on who's running, what their platform is, what they're fighting for, and then vote accordingly to what you believe. You have the right to vote, you have the responsibility to vote to help make a change that you want to see brought forth in this world. Moving on. Next, we have mobility rights. These are the right to enter, to remain in, as well as leave Canada. You have the right to come and go as you please. Not everywhere does, and we often take it for granted. There are legal rights. These are protection against unreasonable search and seizure, fair trial rights, to name a few. There are equality rights, protection against discrimination, which is what we're going to mainly be focusing on today. There are also language rights, rights for English and French speakers, for minority language education. It applies to government actions and laws, but allows for reasonable limits and exceptions like the notwithstanding clause, specifically Section 33, which lets governments override certain rights temporarily. This is all included in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Next, we'll look at the Canadian Human Rights Act. It was formed in 1977 and is a federal law that prohibits discrimination in areas under federal jurisdiction. So this would include employment and services provided by the government or federally regulated businesses such as banks and airlines. This act protects against discrimination based on factors like race, sex, age, disability, sexual orientation. The act is enforced by the Canadian Human Rights Commission. They investigate complaints, and the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal, which we'll get to in a little bit here, which adjudicates cases. So unlike the charter that we first heard about, which applies to government actions, this act focuses on preventing discrimination mainly in workplaces and services regulated by the federal government. Next, we have the Ontario Human Rights Code. It was formed in 1962 and is a law that protects individuals in Ontario specifically, the province of Ontario, from discrimination in key areas of life such as employment, housing, and services. It prohibits discrimination based on factors, again, race, gender, disability, age, sexual orientation, and religion. Again, the Human Rights Commission promotes and enforces the code, while the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario resolves complaints. So this code, the Ontario Human Rights Code, applies to private and public sectors in Ontario, ensuring equal treatment and preventing harassment and discrimination in everyday life. So see how we're starting to see a trend about these numerous protections put in place to deal with discrimination on every level. Doesn't matter if you're in the workplace, in school, in a public place, how there are different acts and laws put in place to keep you safe. We are going to move now into workplace protections. In Canada, workplace protections ensure fair treatment, safety, and rights for workers. These protections come from employment standards, labor laws, and human rights legislation at both the federal and the provincial level. So unlike our Canadian Human Rights Act, which is just a federal law, Ontario Human Rights Code, which is the provincial, the workplace protections work at both the federal and provincial levels. When we talk employment standards, we're talking about laws which set minimum workplace rights. Now these include minimum wage, maximum work hours and overtime pay, paid vacation and holidays, job protected leaves. There was a time where if you had to leave to have a baby, you went on maternity leave, you got sick for an extended period of time. When you came back, your job wasn't necessarily there waiting for you. We now have these job protected leaves that include parental and sick leaves, for example. It also speaks to termination notice and severance pay. Now, it's important to note that each province or territory has its own Employment Standards Act. Here in Ontario, we have the Ontario Employment Standards Act. Now, on the federal level, there are federally regulated industries which follow the Canada Labour Code. And this brings us into some of the labor laws, which protect unionized workers, and they regulate the right to join a union, they regulate collective bargaining rights, protection against unfair labor practices, as well as dispute resolution through arbitration or strikes. They specifically ensure fair treatment in unionized workplaces and prevent unfair labor practices. Together, employment standards and labor laws create safe, fair, and equitable workplaces across Canada. So we've looked at how there are protections in place for the educational system, for the various public spaces, specifically the workplace. I wanted to throw in the Criminal Code of Canada. The Criminal Code of Canada is the federal law that defines criminal offenses, procedures, and penalties in Canada. It outlines crimes such as homicide, assault, theft, fraud, drug-related offenses, as well as legal defenses and sentencing guidelines. The code also governs law enforcement powers, court procedures, and the rights of the accused. It is periodically updated to reflect changes in societal values and legal interpretations. The Criminal Code applies nationwide and is enforced by federal, provincial, and municipal law enforcement agencies. Then that brings us to our Human Rights Tribunal. The Human Rights Tribunal is responsible for adjudicating complaints of discrimination under human rights laws. Its role is to hear cases where individuals or groups allege violations of human rights, such as discrimination based on race, gender, disability, other protected grounds that we've talked about. The tribunal operates independently. That means they stand alone, and they have the authority to make binding decisions, including ordering remedies like compensation or policy changes. Each jurisdiction in Canada has its own tribunal, such as the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal at the federal level and the provincial or territorial Human Rights Tribunal level. It's good to know what they are, who you can turn to, where you can turn to if you are feeling discriminated against, what you can do and where you can take it to. Knowing that there is a Canadian Human Rights Tribunal who will hear cases and then hold them accountable is reassuring. By combining legal protections and public awareness, Canada aims to promote an inclusive and equitable society, although still recognizing that challenges and gaps in enforcement remain. I wanted to include that to make you aware that yes, even though it's 2025 and we should know these things, there are still gaps, and that's why it's important to advocate and fight for, because they can fall through the cracks. So you can be faced with incidences at school, at work, in the public, where you might still face this, and it's important to know that you can fight for it. You have the right. Because our class is focusing on leadership and peer support and how to be better in those roles, We want to acknowledge the rights and responsibilities of everyone, and that includes looking at our diverse communities. So we want to be able to understand what is diversity. It's important to note that diversity refers to the variety of unique characteristics that individuals in a community bring. Now, this can include, but it's not limited to, gender, race, culture, ethnicity, abilities, sexual orientation, age, religion, and socioeconomic level. The dimensions of diversity, we've talked about the characteristics. It's important to understand what it is that we're referring to when we say gender. What is it that we mean when we say race and ethnicity? How can this be important for diversity? So, we want to look at gender being differences in identity and expression. Race and ethnicity are various racial and ethnic backgrounds and their cultural contributions. We want to talk culture, that this can include traditions, customs, and languages. When we talk ability, we're talking about variations in physical ability, mental ability, and emotional capabilities. Sexual orientation refers to the spectrum of orientations and identities. Age are the perspectives across generations. Religion includes the different beliefs, practices, and values of individuals. The socioeconomic level is the economic and social diversity. Being exposed to various dimensions of diversity can foster creativity and innovation. When surrounded by people different than yourself, you can gain diverse perspectives, which can lead to new ideas and solutions. You may broaden your understanding by being exposed to different viewpoints, which can foster empathy and global awareness. If we were to work with all of the same people all of the time, we'd be stuck going over the same conversations, the same ideas, the same problems. You want people to complement each other. You want somebody who has the strengths that you don't, so that you can build off of each other and work more coherently. If we were all the same, we wouldn't get ahead at all or as quickly, depending. When you have somebody to bring in a new perspective, a new thought, a new idea, then it generates more ideas, thoughts, and solutions. Diversity can strengthen communities as inclusivity creates a sense of belonging and unity. When you are aware of diversity and what it can bring to the table, you grow as an individual in your empathy, and including everybody can then foster this sense of belonging and unity and more success and productivity. If people feel that they are valued and they are contributing, they will continue to build and produce. It's important to acknowledge that change can be hard, and often with differences, there can be miscommunication. This happens when you have two native English speakers working together on a same project that they've been doing for a year. You can still have miscommunication. If you can have miscommunication there, then of course it makes sense that miscommunication can happen when there are differences. Differences in language or cultural norms can lead to misunderstandings. Sometimes we truly don't know, and it is an honest mistake. That's where you want to learn to grow from it and do better next time. To say, I was unaware that those were the cultural practices and I apologize. Please teach me so that I know better for next time. Unfortunately, misinformation can also create stereotypes and bias. So many times we just play ignorant and say, well, this is what I thought, and and I had this misunderstanding with this one individual. So then use that blanket feeling and thought and description on everybody else like them. Those are those stereotypes that don't make them true. Just because one individual was this way doesn't mean all individuals are that way. Prejudices can create barriers to inclusion. It's important to keep an open mind and always be willing to listen and learn from those around you. When you are closed minded, conflict can ensue. Clashing of values or beliefs will then lead to tension. That is not how a good leader can lead. You want to be open minded. You want to always be reflecting. That's why we practice in our key questions reflection on lessons and topics. We want to be growing. We want to be learning. Leaders who are educated and aware build trust. They foster collaboration. That's that teamwork. They create inclusive environments where team members feel value. We've talked about barriers to learning and how a barrier can simply be the environment that you're in. When you don't feel safe, when you don't feel comfortable, you shut down. And then you can't take in anything new and you can't be your best. We want to be mindful of that. It's so important for leaders to recognize and value diverse perspectives, backgrounds, and experiences. When you respect differences, you encourage creativity, innovation, and a sense of belonging within the team. From the role of a leader, this looks like actively listening to team members' viewpoints without judgment. We're going to get more into effective communication as we go out throughout this course. In Unit 4, we're going to talk about how to be effective communicators. A lot of the material in this course is repetitive. We talk about how to be a good leader in every lesson, and often it mimics what was told in other lessons because it reinforces the importance. We're going to talk about these leadership skills. A lot of it will sound familiar because we started laying the groundwork in Unit 1. We're going to reinforce it and come back to it throughout the Unit 2, 3, and 4 material, just so it cements the learning. Celebrating cultural, professional, and personal diversity through team building activities is crucial for a leader who respects differences. They avoid bias by creating inclusive decision-making processes, taking everyone's perspectives into account and learning from what they have to say now and not basing it on misconceived pre-notions and reinforcing those stereotypes or bias. It's also important that leaders have a commitment to equity and fairness, that they ensure all individuals are treated impartially and have equal opportunities. Being able to accomplish this will build trust and morale by showing that leadership decisions are based on merit and fairness. They're not doing this out of selfishness to go climb the corporate ladder to make themselves look better. It shows that there's a reason that they're doing what they're doing and it's going to be for the good of the team. Proving and providing equal access to resources, training, and opportunities will show in the leader's abilities. Addressing inequities promptly and transparently shows that you are a good leader making decisions based on merit and fairness. Establishing clear policies that promote fairness in performance evaluations and promotions. Transparency is huge so that everybody knows you're coming at it from a place of trust, equity, and fairness. You're not being sneaky, you're not hiding anything, you're not showing preferential treatment to one individual over another. To reiterate some of the leadership skills, we want to talk again about flexibility, integrity, and honesty. When a leader takes into consideration the need to adapt to the changing circumstances and accommodates the needs of others, they are showing flexibility, which enhances resilience and fosters a supportive work environment. So, the leader who can be open to feedback and willing to adjust plans when necessary has the flexibility as a skill. When they can support work life balance by offering flexible scheduling where possible. It's huge in this day and age, especially after our COVID pandemic, where we had to learn to juggle work remotely. It's so important to recognize how that, as hard as the pandemic was on a lot of individuals and the impact it had on mental health, there were keys to take away from it. How we realized for parents who have either their own issues or with their children, how important this flexible scheduling can be. And it's something that as a leader, you want to be mindful of so you can be accommodating, you can be flexible, you can offer the option of flexible scheduling to members of your team. It's also important to note, though, from the peer support side, that what works for you doesn't necessarily work for everybody, and to be conscientious of this scheduling flexibility to help everybody's work-life balance. When you approach challenges with a problem-solving mindset rather than rigid adherence to rules, you are showing flexibility. A leader must strive to act consistently with ethical principles and values, even when it's difficult. Here comes the foundation for a lot of what we're talking about and going to continue talking about, especially when we get into the ethical considerations of privacy, confidentiality. We want to note that striving to act consistently with ethical principles and values will make you stand out as a great leader, not compromising when it gets tough. We talked about how we want to have the ability to accommodate and not to bend whenever it breaks or it becomes uneasy or it becomes too expensive. We don't want to fall into the failure to accommodate because it got a little bit hard. We want to strive even when it's difficult. Having integrity establishes a moral standard that inspires others to follow. From the role of the leader, this looks like making decisions that align with organizational and personal ethics. We talked way back in lesson 1 about building your goals, knowing who you are, recognizing your values, and sticking with them. Treating all individuals with dignity and respect, regardless of their role. Yes, there are organizational hierarchies. Yes, they are put in place for a reason. Yes, we have upper admins and we have those in leadership, but treating everybody with dignity and respect, regardless of their role, goes such a long way. Holding yourself and others accountable to high ethical standards will help you to stand out as a leader. Lastly, we're going to discuss honesty. Similarly, communicating truthfully and transparently while respecting confidentiality is an important aim. Those who are honest build credibility and trust within a team. From the role of a leader, this looks like providing clear, accurate, and timely information. When you are transparent, open, honest, then your team is willing to work with you more because they recognize you're not holding out, you're not hiding anything, you're giving them the information that you have in a timely and efficient manner. Similarly, admitting mistakes. This is huge, and so many people now, even though it's 2025 and we know so much more about mental health, and it's amazing to me how many people still cannot admit mistakes and take accountability for their decisions. Why is this such a topic that we feel we have to hide and be shameful of and sweep under the rug? Why can't we admit when we're wrong and say, even if we don't know the answer, you don't have to even be wrong yet. I'm not sure. Let me look into that for you. You know what? That's a good question. I don't have a great answer for you right now. Let me get back to you. It's such an easy statement that can go such a long way in the role of leadership. Fostering open communication where team members feel comfortable sharing concerns goes along with the ability to become approachable. When you are honest and open and transparent and can admit your mistakes, you are becoming a role model that allows your team members to do the same. We want to have open communication where everybody is comfortable sharing concerns when they arise. Leadership and peer support roles come with both privileges, so those are the rights, as well as obligations, which are our responsibilities. Traits like the ones we mentioned, but also fairness, respect, and accountability, are key attributes in a quality leader. You want to be able to balance both the rights and responsibilities in order to foster trust and effectiveness. So let's look at rights versus responsibilities. Rights are entitlements or freedoms that individuals can expect to be upheld. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights outlines fundamental human rights to be universally protected. It consists of 30 articles, one of which includes the right to education. The Declaration emphasizes the inherent dignity of all individuals and the equality of all people, regardless of race, gender, nationality, or religion. Examples of your rights include the right to a safe environment. Everyone has the right to work or engage in spaces free from physical and psychological harm. This is where we're starting to put the mental health with the physical health. Everyone has the right to freedom from harassment and discrimination. No one should face bullying, bias, unfair treatment based on your race, gender, religion, or other personal characteristics. You have the right to adequate training and resources. Leaders and peer supporters should receive the tools and knowledge they need to perform effectively. Similarly, from the other side of that, when you are in that role, you need to give adequate training and resources to the members of your team. Lastly, support for mental and emotional well-being. Access to resources for mental health and support systems is essential. On the flip side are our responsibilities, which are duties or obligations that individuals must fulfill to maintain ethical and functional environments. With rights come responsibilities. If we have the right to free speech, then we have the responsibility to listen and be courteous while others are speaking. Other examples of responsibilities include following safe procedures. If you have the right to a safe environment, then you also must adhere to safety guidelines and encourage others to do so. If you have the freedom from harassment and discrimination, you also have the responsibility to ethical behavior. Always act with integrity, fairness, and transparency. Respect others and their property. Treat everyone with dignity and ensure shared resources are used responsibly. You have the responsibility to maintain confidentiality. Protect sensitive information shared by team members or peers. When you're in a position of power and trust, you must apply principles and protocols related to confidentiality and privacy rights. This is crucial for continued trust, fostering a safe environment, ensuring compliance with ethical and legal standards. Again, we're going to get through this with a lot more examples and in depth as we continue throughout our course, talking about how to maintain privacy and confidentiality in the place. This is setting us up for that. Principles of confidentiality and privacy include respect for autonomy, transparency and informed consent, compliance with legal and ethical standards. When we talk respect for autonomy, we're saying individuals have the right to control their personal information and decide what they wish to disclose. Leaders should obtain explicit consent before sharing any information about individuals, even with other colleagues, unless mandated by law or policy. And that's key because we want to keep people safe. So if it comes down to one's safety, then yes, sometimes there needs to be that breach. Information should only be shared with those directly involved and only when it is necessary for decision making or support. When in a team setting, discuss sensitive issues only with relevant personnel who need the information to perform their roles. When you are ethical, when you are honest, when you have integrity, then you do this without gossip or back judgment. We're just doing it with those who are on the need to know basis. Transparency and informed consent, we're talking about individuals must be informed about how their information will be used, stored, and shared. As a leader, you must clearly explain confidentiality policies to individuals, including legal limits such as reporting requirements for abuse or threats of harm. We always want to keep that safety piece in mind. Lastly, adherence to laws like HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, or equivalent regulations depending on your profession. There are professional codes of ethics. Leaders must be aware of and adhere to jurisdictional laws governing confidentiality and privacy. So then we have certain protocols in place that leaders must be aware of and mindful so that confidentiality and privacy can be protected. The first is data protection and storage. This is making sure you use secure systems. Anytime you can, use the encrypted files, password protected databases when storing sensitive information. Properly dispose of records when no longer needed. You don't want to just throw it into a garbage can where anyone can find, where it can float around the dump. You have to properly discard any information that you're not using. The boundaries of confidentiality. Establish and communicate clear boundaries for confidentiality at the outset of any interaction, including limitations. Be open, be honest, be transparent from the get-go, then you can't be caught afterwards. Anonymity. Remove personal identifiable information when discussing cases or sharing insights with third parties for training, supervision, or organization reporting. We want to maintain that anonymity so that everyone's rights are protected. Lastly, monitoring and auditing. You want to regularly review confidentiality practices within the organization to identify potential risks. Being present amongst your team allows for a proactive approach to stop things before they get too bad. When you are working amongst, you can ensure compliance and you're not dealing with the backlash after. As a leader, it is imperative that you maintain confidentiality when addressing performance issues, grievances, personal matters shared by employees. When acting in the peer support role, you want to be mindful and create a safe space where peers feel comfortable sharing sensitive information. Always assure those around you of confidentiality within legal and ethical boundaries. It was a lot. I thank you for letting me get on my soapbox a little bit and sharing with you the importance of, even though some of this can seem dry, we need to know it. We need to be better leaders. We need to be there to support our peers. I hope you have a great rest of your day. We'll see you tomorrow for Lesson 8.